The moment I heard his voice through that half-open door, something in my chest went very still. It was Thanksgiving. My son's house. I'd driven 40 minutes through rain to get there, hit a slow patch on the interstate around exit 14, and pulled into the driveway about 20 minutes later than I'd told them. The porch light was on. I could hear voices inside. Laughter. The sound of a football game on somewhere in the back of the house. I didn't ring the bell. It was my son's home, but I'd been coming to that door for 6 years, since he and his wife bought the place. I just turned the handle. That's when I heard it. Honestly, that was my son-in-law's voice. Not my actual son-in-law, but my daughter's husband, Victor. He was talking from what sounded like the living room, just around the corner from the entryway. Thanksgiving's always better when he's not here. I said it. I'm sorry, but I said it. There was nervous laughter. A few people. I recognized my daughter's laugh, or something close to it. A quick, uncomfortable sound, the kind you make when you don't want to agree but you don't want to argue either. I stood in the doorway with rain on my jacket and the bottle of Pinot Noir under my arm, and I did not move for probably 10 full seconds. Then I stepped back. Pulled the door closed behind me without a sound. Walked to my car. Sat in the driver's seat in the dark, in the rain with the engine off. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people assume it was pure anger. It wasn't. The anger came later. What I felt first was something more like embarrassment. The old, deep kind. The kind that finds the cracks in you and fills them. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for a regional firm. I have reviewed fraud cases involving millions of dollars. I have testified in federal court, and I sat in that car feeling exactly like I was 16 again, and had just been laughed at by someone I wanted to like me. That lasted about 4 minutes. Then I drove to a diner on Route 9, ordered black coffee and a slice of pecan pie, and started thinking very clearly. Let me back up, because you need to understand who Victor is. My daughter, I'll call her by what I call her, which is just my daughter, because she's the only one, is 34 years old. She married Victor 3 years ago at a vineyard in the hill country. Nice wedding. I paid for a portion of it happily. She was glowing. I thought he was all right, loud, the kind of man who fills a room with his personality and then seems confused when the room gets tired. But he treated her well, or so I believed, and she loved him, and that was enough for me. Victor sells commercial real estate, or he says he does. What I've come to understand, slowly and then all at once, is that Victor is better at the appearance of selling commercial real estate than the actual practice of it. He drives a leased Escalade. He wears watches that cost more than my first car. He has an office and a building downtown with his name on frosted glass. And as far as I can tell, 2 of his 3 employees are essentially decorative. The first time I noticed something off was about 18 months ago. My daughter called me, which she didn't do often. We texted mostly, had dinner once a month, that kind of relationship. But she called, and her voice had that tight quality that tells me she's been rehearsing what she's going to say. Dad, Victor has this opportunity. I said, what kind of opportunity? A development project. Mixed use, downtown corridor. His firm is co-investing with 2 other groups. It's a really solid deal, Dad. The margin's how much? I said. Silence. Then, he was wondering if you'd consider putting in $60,000. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't think about it for long. I'd spent 3 decades watching people get separated from their money by men who used phrases like solid deal and mixed use and co-investing. I said no. I kept it simple. I said I wasn't in a position to take on that kind of risk at this stage, which was not entirely true. I have a reasonable retirement, my house is paid off, I'm comfortable, but it was the easiest way to close the door. Victor never said anything to me directly, but after that, things shifted. It was subtle at first. He'd be on his phone when I arrived at family gatherings. He'd leave the room when I entered it. At my grandson's 2nd birthday party, I watched him guide my daughter to the other side of the yard when I walked over to them. When I mentioned it to her, gently, carefully, she said I was imagining things. Then came the comments. Little ones. Your dad always has to have an opinion, doesn't he? Said just loudly enough. He still thinks it's 1987 after I mentioned interest rates. Once, at Easter, when I was in the kitchen helping clear dishes, and he didn't know I was close enough to hear. Your father looks at me like I'm a suspect. Maybe I did. I had reasons. About 2 months before Thanksgiving, I ran into a man named Clifford at a golf club fundraiser. Clifford was a developer. Real developer, old school, had built half the mixed-use retail on the east side of the city over the past 20 years. We'd overlapped professionally once or twice in my working years. We had a drink and talked, and his name came up. You know a Victor? I mentioned my daughter's married name. Clifford set down his glass. That's your son-in-law? I said it was. He said. I waited. He came to us about 8 months ago, Clifford said carefully. Wanted to talk about partnering on a project. We looked at his financials. He paused. I'll just say we passed. I didn't push him. He didn't offer more. But Clifford is not a dramatic man. If he passed on a deal, there was a reason. I drove home that evening thinking about my daughter, about what she might or might not know, about whether she was protecting him or protecting herself, or just protecting the version of her life she'd decided to believe in. I thought about the $60,000 again. I thought about my son's retirement accounts, which my daughter had mentioned offhandedly a few months earlier. Victor had helped my son with some investment allocation. My son is not a financially sophisticated person. He's a good man, an electrician, he works hard, he trusts people. That's when I started paying attention in a more organized way. I'm not going to pretend I handled the next 6 weeks elegantly. I didn't. I'm 63, not a private investigator, and some of what I did was clumsy. But here's what I knew how to do. I knew how to read financial documents. I knew how to identify patterns. I knew what shell entities looked like, how they were structured, what they were used for. 31 years. My son had given Victor some kind of limited power of attorney over a brokerage account, a smaller one, maybe $40,000, so Victor could manage the rebalancing. He'd mentioned it casually at dinner once. I'd felt a cold drop in my stomach, but said nothing. I asked my son to send me his last 3 statements. He said, sure, no problem. What did I need them for? I said I was just curious how the market had treated him. He sent them that night. The account had gone from $41,000 to $26,000 in 14 months. The stated reason was market volatility. I looked at the trade history. Some of it made sense. Some of it did not. There were transfers I couldn't trace to any obvious purpose. Small amounts, 400 here, 900 there, moved to an account with a routing number I didn't recognize. I sat at my desk with those statements for a long time. I want to be clear. I didn't know yet. I suspected. There's a difference. I had been wrong before in my career. Not often, but wrong. And I had learned to be careful about the distance between a pattern and a conclusion. So I kept going. I have a friend, I'll just call him my friend, who spent 22 years in banking compliance. He owed me a favor from a long time ago, the kind of favor that doesn't get repaid easily. I sent him the routing number. 3 days later, he called me back. That account belongs to a holding company, he said, registered in Delaware, formed about 16 months ago. Name of the company, he told me. I won't repeat it here, but the initials were the same as my son-in-law's full name. I hung up the phone and sat very still for a moment. Then I started writing things down. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The way I used to when I was building a case file, the old instincts come back like muscle memory. Now, here I was. Thanksgiving. Rain. Sitting in a diner parking lot after hearing my son-in-law tell a room full of my family that the holiday was better without me. I ate my pecan pie. I drank my coffee. I thought about what I was going to do. There was a version of this where I called my daughter that night and told her everything I knew. I considered it seriously. She was my daughter. She deserved to know. But I had watched enough fraud cases to understand something uncomfortable. When you tell someone that the person they love is taking from them, they don't always believe you. Sometimes they believe you eventually, but sometimes the first instinct is to protect the person they've chosen, Because accepting the truth means accepting that they made a terrible mistake, and that's a harder thing to do than you'd expect. If I went to my daughter with a routing number and a Delaware holding company and a list of $400 transfers, Victor would know I was coming before I'd finished the sentence. He'd have explanations ready. He'd make me look like the paranoid old man he'd apparently been describing to people at family gatherings for months. I needed to be sure. And I needed my daughter to see it for herself. The week after Thanksgiving, I called my son. I said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. He said, Okay, Dad. I said, Has Victor ever asked you to put more money into that account, or talked to you about other investments? Long pause. He mentioned something, my son said. A few months back, said he had a real estate opportunity if I wanted in. I told him I didn't have the cash right now. Did he push? Another pause. A little. Yeah, he kind of pushed. I told my son to do nothing. I said I was looking into something and I didn't want to alarm him, but I needed him to freeze any movement in that brokerage account and not to tell anyone, including his wife, until I gave him the all clear. My son is a trusting man, but he trusts me. Okay, he said, here is what I had. When I laid it all out, the Delaware holding company formed 16 months ago. Around the same time, Victor had taken over management of my son's account. Transfers totaling approximately $9,000 moved into that entity over 14 months, a development project that a serious developer had looked at and quietly walked away from. A pattern of behavior. The pushed loans, the investment pitches, the careful management of access to money that wasn't his. It wasn't enough to take to a lawyer yet. It might not be criminal. The transfers could have an innocent explanation, though I was struggling to imagine what it was. But it was enough. I called my daughter. I said I wanted to have dinner, just the two of us, before Christmas. She sounded surprised. We didn't do one-on-one dinners often, but she said yes. We met at a restaurant she liked, Italian place, not far from her office. She was already there when I arrived. She looked good, tired, the way she'd looked tired for a while, but put together. We talked about her work, her friend's baby, a trip they were thinking about taking in the spring. Then I set a folder on the table. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just put it there, and I said, I need to show you some things, and I need you to look at them before you say anything. She looked at the folder, then at me. Then she opened it. I watched her face. There's a particular expression people get when they see evidence of something they've been trying not to know. It's not surprise exactly. It's more like exhaustion. The final letting go of the effort of not knowing. I recognized it from 3 decades of sitting across from people in conference rooms. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, how long have you known? I've been looking for about 2 months, I said. I don't know everything. I want to be clear about that. I knew something was wrong, she said. It came out quiet, almost to herself. I didn't know what. I kept telling myself. She stopped. I know, I said. The 60,000, she said. He was angry when you said no. Really angry. He didn't show it to you, but I know, I said again. We sat there for a while. The waiter came, and we both waved him away without looking at him. What do I do? She said. You don't have to decide tonight, I said, but I think you need to talk to a lawyer, separately from Victor, someone who represents you and only you. She nodded slowly. And I think you need to look at your own accounts, I said. All of them. Her face changed again. This time it was something harder. Not grief, but something that would become grief later, after the anger had done its work. He told me you didn't trust him, she said. He said you were always looking for something wrong. He made it seem like you were the problem. I know, I said, for the 3rd time. She looked at me across the table. You heard him on Thanksgiving, didn't you? It wasn't a question. I heard enough, I said. She covered her face with both hands. Stayed like that for a moment. then took them down. I'm sorry, Dad. Don't, I said. You don't owe me that. Not yet. It took 4 months. A lawyer, a financial forensic specialist, someone younger than me, sharper in ways I wasn't anymore, who could trace digital threads I wouldn't have known to look for. The discovery that the Delaware entity had been used to pull not 9,000 but closer to 31,000 out of my son's account over the course of 14 months, through a chain of transactions designed to look like routine management fees. The discovery, also, that my daughter's own joint checking account had been quietly drained of an amount she hadn't noticed because Victor managed the finances and she had trusted him to do so. He denied everything, at first. Then he hired a lawyer. Then his lawyer had a conversation with her lawyer, and things moved in the way they move when someone knows the evidence is real and they are trying to minimize their exposure. There was no criminal prosecution in the end. My son got most of his money back. My daughter got a settlement of sorts. There are things I cannot say because of agreements that were signed. What I can say is this. Victor is no longer in the picture. My son-in-law is gone. My daughter is not gone. She's here. She's steady. She's doing the hard work of rebuilding something after a long time of not looking at it too closely. We have dinner now, just the two of us, more often than we used to. This past Thanksgiving, she hosted at her apartment, smaller, quieter than her old house. My son was there, his wife, my 2 grandchildren, me. My daughter made the turkey. My son made his cornbread stuffing, the recipe he got from his mother, and refuses to modify despite all evidence that it could be improved. I opened a bottle of wine and we ate together, and nobody gave a toast. Afterward, my grandson fell asleep on the couch, with his head on my knee, and I sat there in the quiet of my daughter's apartment, in the lamplight, watching the football game with the sound mostly off. And I thought about that moment in the doorway a year before. The rain, the bottle of wine, the laughter I wasn't supposed to hear. I used to think trust was something you gave to people until they gave you a reason not to. I don't think that anymore. I think trust is something you tend to, like a garden. You have to actually look at it, get in there, know what's growing. You can't just assume it's fine because the surface looks nice. 31 years of forensic accounting taught me that. 63 years of living confirmed it. My daughter learned it the hard way. But she learned it. And she's not the kind of woman who learns something twice. That, in the end, is what I'm most grateful for.